من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم إلى نور الفهم وأكرمنا بمعرفة العلم وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم يا أرحم الراحمين. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless this beginning as we start a new course in explaining one of furud al-ayn, one of the subjects of essential knowledge for every single Muslim, and that is Fiqh of Salah, the ins and outs of how to pray and the rulings relating to it in terms of the conditions, obligations, invalidators, recommendations, different types of prayers, and the inward and outward in terms of the spiritual and the procedural aspects of prayers. Things that I'm hoping that we get a chance to cover fully in the next 3 months, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, from now until mid-December, before the winter break. Today we're going to be going over a bunch of introductions to the subject, and then inshallah next week we'll be able to get into the details right away. Introductions for today, we have very limited amount of time, of course with the Isha at 8:25. I'm going to ask you guys by the end of this class if next week, either next week or the week after, we need to start after Isha. Because Isha's Maghrib is quickly moving earlier, and Isha is going to get within maybe 3 weeks as low as 7:30. So we're going to have to start after Isha anyway, sooner or later. But we could decide when to do that by the end of this class, inshallah. As an introduction to this course, it's really, really important to understand how important fiqh is to study. And in order to explain that, I have in front of you here a syllabus that gives us basically the full parameters of what fiqh is about. What is fiqh? Why is it essential? And why is it actually a very interesting subject to study? You know, if we go to the end of this syllabus, I'll come back to all this stuff a little bit later on, it'll give us what we call al-mabadi' al-ashara, the 10 introductory principles. The scholars identified these 10 things as things that everyone needs to know about whenever studying one of the Islamic disciplines in order to get full clarity about what they're studying. This course is a formal class. It's not just a general reminder. It's not spiritual doses, although hopefully there will be spiritual things in it. But it's something that I hope we can engage and in fact apply ourselves to, so that we actually end up learning something that we could carry with us and for the rest of our lives. Because it is part of necessary knowledge, right? So what are the, and I'll get to explaining what necessary knowledge is through these 10 introductory principles though. So what are the 10 introductory principles? They mentioned them in 3 lines of poetry in Arabic. إن مبادئ كل فن عشرة الحد والموضوع ثم الثمرة. They say there are 10 things you need to know about. Definition, subject matter. You need to know the benefit of studying it. What's the merit of this science in relation to other sciences? What's the merit of this science in relation to other sciences? And who's the founder of this science, right? What are its different names? What are its sources? What's the legal rulings that are covered in that? What is the legal ruling of studying it? And what are the issues covered in the science? So that's basically what's listed out here. What is fiqh? Now if I was to ask you that question, what does fiqh mean to you in terms of its meaning in language? Would any of you guys know? What does fiqh mean? What does fiqh mean in language? Arabic language. If any of you know Arabic, what does it mean? Anyone know? What? No, that's not a linguistic definition. Someone said it over here. Who said that? I heard someone say something over here. Al-fahm, understanding. Al-fiqhu al-fahm. Fiqh is understanding. It's actually mentioned in the Quran. قالوا شعيب يا شعيب ما نفقه كثيرا مما تقول. We don't understand a lot of what you're saying, O Shu'aib. So fiqh is fahm, it's understanding, it's a depth of understanding. It's actually also mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Prophet ﷺ says, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whoever Allah wants goodness for, He'll give him a depth of understanding of religion. Fiqh means fahm, that's in language, understanding. And when you come to apply yourself or learn about fiqh, you're going to realize that it'll teach you how to distinguish and decipher different things, right? There's a bucket for everything. There's something that's called wajib, it's obligatory. There's something else that's called mustahab, recommended. There's something else that's makruh, it's offensive. You should avoid it. You don't get sin for doing it, but you should avoid it, it's offensive. Something else that's mubah, that's just allowable. And then there's something else that's haram. Doing it is a sin. These are different issues. And then you know what? It'll clarify to you the variables. Fiqh is all about searching for variables, all right? How is this situation different than that one, and how is that one different than another, right? So fiqh means fahm. But now, among Islamic sciences, what does fiqh relate to? We know what aqeedah relates to. Aqeedah, what does aqeedah relate to? Aqeedah relates to? Anyone? Islamic creed, what does it relate to? It relates to your beliefs, right? Islamic creed, aqeedah, relates to iman. It relates to what you believe in. It defines who a Muslim is. What makes a Muslim, right? That's what aqeedah talks about. What does fiqh talk about? Fiqh talks about actions. That's what it talks about. It talks about a'mal al-mukallafin, the actions of people who are legally responsible or accountable before Allah. That's what fiqh is all about, actions. And when you're talking about actions, there are endless possibilities of what can be done or what can be abandoned. And that's why fiqh needs a discerning mind, a discerning eye, and a critical mind. That's what fiqh needs. It needs a discerning eye and a critical mind because the possibilities are endless. How many verses are in the Quran? Right? How many verses are in the Quran? Huh? Anyone know an approximation? Let's see if anyone could mention the right 1,000. How many thousands? 14? No, not 14,000. Huh? Someone said something over here. 6,236. There's different countings of the Mus'haf. You'll find some variance between that. Anyway, there are a certain number of verses in the Quran. That's set. It's done. How many hadiths are there? There are a certain number of hadiths. Right? They say, the scholars, they teach us a very important word of wisdom. What do they say? النصوص متناهية والوقائع غير متناهية. The number of texts you could find in the Quran and Sunnah are limited. The number of texts in the Quran and Sunnah are limited. But the number of situations that could arise in the lives of people are endless. So what does that tell you? If you have a limited number of texts and an endless number of situations, you need, please, if you're going to talk on the phone, please don't talk in the musalla. Jazakumullah khair, I can hear you. Right. So the situations are endless. So that means you need to be able to address new things. That's why we need fiqh. Some people, they get confused. Well, okay, if I have the Quran and Sunnah, why do I need anything else? Who are these fuqaha? These people who, speak about fiqh. These jurists. They make things up on their own. Why should I follow them? Why should I follow the jurists when I have what Allah said and what the Prophet ﷺ said? Answer to that is, you will not find everything addressed in a clear text from the Quran or Sunnah. You need the principles that could guide you to address new things, and that's what fiqh is all about. Right? Fiqh is about ijtihad. And we're gonna, if you take a course with me, inshallah, in the future about usul al-fiqh, you will learn more about what ijtihad is. We don't know, the Quran and Sunnah doesn't say anything about credit cards. The Quran and Sunnah doesn't say anything about mortgages. The Quran and Sunnah doesn't say anything about many of the things that we deal with as Muslims today. But the origins of how to address these issues are found in the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah, and that's what the fuqaha highlight. Let's read the definition. What is fiqh? It's the knowledge of legal judgments that relate to the conduct of human beings. derived from the detailed evidences of sacred law, of the Quran and Sunnah. When Allah tells you, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, when Allah tells you establish prayers, this is a command. And the default in commands is that they teach you that there's something obligatory here. Allah's commanding you to do this. That means you have to do it. So we learn from this, prayers are obligatory, right? That's how the faqih deals with texts from the Quran and Sunnah. But it's not as black and white as that, because sometimes you'll find a command verb and it actually won't be for a command. It'll be for something that's recommended, not required, right? So there's a lot of different angles to this. And you study that, you study the sources of legislation in this science called usul al-fiqh. How many of you have ever heard of usul al-fiqh before? How many of you? Most of you have not, right? Most of you have not. This is just giving you a dose of that. Inshallah, you're going to find that one of the most savory things about a course like this is it will trigger your inquisitive mind, because it's relating to something you do every day. Every day, every single one of us is praying, right? There's no more practical a science than you could get than fiqh, because you're doing it anyway. Whether you're an average Muslim or a learned Muslim, it doesn't matter. This applies to every single one of us goes through different situations that confuse them at certain points, right? So fiqh is a very, very practical science. It relates to the conducts of human beings, right? And their different situations, right? So you and I, we're the subject matter of usul fiqh, the actions of legally responsible individuals in relations to 10 rulings. These 10 rulings are taken from the Quran and Sunnah. 5 of them, we already listed them out. We already listed them, the 5. The wajib and the haram and the mustahab and the makruh and the mubah. These 5. And then there's 5 more you add to them, right? And they're going to come in the introduction, so I'm not going to get to them right now. The ahkam wad'iyya. What triggers the requirement of praying dhuhr, for example? If you were to try to answer that. What triggers the requirement of praying dhuhr on any given day? Go ahead, Zakaria. The sun being in a certain position in the sky, right? It being at its zenith, crossing the meridian, as they say, and that's when dhuhr becomes obligatory. That is from the ahkam wad'iyya. This is from the rulings that are relating to circumstance, cause and effect, right? When do you deserve to inherit an estate? Another question for you. When do you deserve to inherit an estate? When do you deserve to inherit an estate? Think about it. It's an obvious answer, but it'll give us another example of cause and effect. Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Anyone know? Yeah. Yeah. The owner of this estate needs to pass away. That's going to trigger something. I'm going to be deserving to inherit this estate if I am a legitimate heir, right? That's cause and effect, right? That's min ahkam al-wad'iyya. Another example of rulings based on circumstance is, all right, what is wudu for salah? What is wudu in pertaining to salah? What do we call it? Well, I know what wudu means. It means ablution, like you said. But its legal designation in relation to salah. So it's a prerequisite. In Arabic, what do we call that? It's a shart, right? What does a shart mean? What is a shart? What is a condition? It is something that when it's there, it's not necessarily mean that you performed the prayer, right? Because you could have wudu without having performed the prayer yet. But when it's absent, you definitely could not have performed the prayer. Meaning that even if you prayed, it's not going to count. It's like worth nothing because you didn't meet the prerequisite. The prerequisite was you needed to have wudu. It's a condition, right? And so on and so forth. They're going to come. The rest of them are going to come. So the subject matter in fiqh is legally responsible individuals. Who's not legally responsible? Give me an example of someone who's not legally responsible for their actions. Let me ask you that. A child. All right, a child's not legally responsible, except by Ridwan. No, I'm just kidding. All right. A child's not legally responsible. All right? That's true. So if a child, like a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, doesn't pray, are they going to carry sins? Of course they're not. They're not going to carry sins if they don't pray. What if, sick people, not responsible for what? Not responsible for wudu. Maybe a sick person would not be responsible for certain ahkam. Like someone who's chronically ill, he won't be responsible for prayers. He'll be responsible for something else, right? He will be responsible for the fidya, the amount of money that you have to give instead of fasting because they can't fast, mathalan. But someone who's not legally responsible at all for anything, you gave one example, a child, right? Now let's say, I'll give you an example of something. A child, hope this never happens, goes in the parking lot right now, grabs a nice big rock, and smashes one of the car windows with it. What if someone comes and says, well, he was a little kid, he's 5 years old. Why are you going to hold him accountable? He's not legally responsible. You can't expect me to pay. He's only 5 years old. He didn't know what he was doing, right? Can someone say that? What do you guys think? We just said he's not legally responsible. What would you say about that? Of course, we're going to make him pay, but is he legally responsible or not? Call his father's going to say, oh, he's not mukallaf, right? He's not my son, right? How do we answer this? We say that daman al-mutlafat, causing property damage, is not from al-ahkam al-taklifiyya. We're not looking at the individual when we see property damage broken. We're looking at the damage. So, damage requires compensation. And it's going to either come from the kid's money if he has money, or his guardian if he has a guardian. And that's not because he's not mukallaf, but he broke something. And that would apply to if someone had like an animal, right? Say if someone had an animal, a cow. I'm sure none of us have cows, but say if someone had a cow, and this cow ended up breaking some property, right? Is someone going to be responsible for that? Yeah. Well, the cow doesn't have a mind. How are you going to hold? No. This is from the rulings relating to circumstance. We don't care about the one who did it, but when there is damage, there needs to be compensation, and we're going to follow this trail until we find someone who could compensate. If the kid could compensate from his money, he has money, his father wants to punish him, you got $1,000 saved up, I'm going to take from your money and pay it off. That's what I'm going to do. He could do that, right? You guys all with me? All right, now, what's the merit of studying fiqh? All right, no, actually, what's the benefit of studying this? Fiqh is actually one of the most spiritual subjects you could study. Why? Because it makes me as a person of those who fulfill the commands of Allah Azza wa Jal. As they said, there's a beautiful quote. What does it say? اتق المحارم تكن أعبد الناس. Be of those who is very clear on avoiding the boundaries of Allah, you'll be the most devout worshipper, right? So someone who learns fiqh will know what they should avoid as a Muslim. They'll be able to build their relationship with Allah Azza wa Jalla on more solid foundation, right? And that's why the merit of being someone who worships Allah upon knowledge is so much more superior than worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal out of ignorance, right? That's of course if other things are met as well. That's why, fiqh, historically, there was this understanding that there is an inward fiqh and there's an outward fiqh. Fiqh al-zahir wa fiqh al-batin. Inward fiqh means fiqh al-qulub, understanding the function of the heart, spirituality. That's why the scholars of old, when they used to write books of fiqh, you know what they used to do? They used to write sections on spirituality in the beginning, and then section on procedural issues later, because they go hand in hand. The inward and outward go hand in hand, right? That's how fiqh books were in earlier days, because that's the path to true spiritual growth. That's why the scholars, they teach us, مَنْ تَصَوَّفَ وَلَمْ يَتَفَقَّهْ فَقَدْ تَزَنْدَقَ وَمَنْ تفقه ولم يتصوف فقد تفسق. They say these very beautiful words of wisdom. Someone who endeavors to become spiritual without having a framework of fiqh to guide them, understanding of the Quran and Sunnah, if they do this, their spirituality will lead them out of Islam. They'll start saying crazy things if they don't have fiqh to guide them. And they say, on the other hand, someone who only studies fiqh without having spirituality to guide them, then they will abuse this knowledge, and this knowledge will lead them to fisq and rebellion against the boundaries of Allah Azza wa Jal. You need the inward and the outward. It's not enough to have good spiritual doses. You need that, but you also need to know what's expected of you as a Muslim. So that's the benefit of studying fiqh, right? That's why I mention this example. They went to the student of Imam Abu Hanifa. His name is Abu Yusuf. And they told him, write a book about spirituality. And he said, I already did. And the book that he was referring to was his book on commerce. It was on business transactions. That's his book on spirituality. Why? Learn how to manage your money. You'll learn how to be a very devout Muslim. Right? That's what he was trying to teach them. Merits. Look at this hadith. Beautiful hadith. Again. مَنْ يُرِيدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ says, if Allah wants goodness for you, He will give you depth of understanding of your religion. Right? Why? Because that will equip me. How can I avoid haram? How can I avoid the influence of the shaitan? Right? That's the merit of studying fiqh. Now, what is its relationship with other sciences? Fiqh, how does it relate to other sciences? It is one of the 3 Sharia sciences. Now, when you come to study Islam, there are different roles for the different disciplines. Like, what could you study? You can study Arabic language. Is it important to study Arabic language? Oh yeah, of course. It's critical. Why? It's a tool science. What's a tool science? Meaning it opens the door to many other forms of knowledge that you could not access otherwise, right? So knowledge of Arabic language is a tool science. It'll give you access to the Quran, it'll give you access to hadith, and it'll give you access to fiqh. So learning Arabic is critical. It's from ulum al-ala. Another example of the tool sciences is usul al-fiqh, the principles of fiqh. It'll give you guidance on how the scholars of fiqh reach their conclusions, the principles, right? Now, what are the objective sciences? We call these ulum al-ghaya or ulum al-maqasid. This is studying fiqh, studying tafsir, studying hadith, right? These are the 3 main sciences that you could possibly study. Where do we get fiqh from? Where do we get fiqh from? This is important to understand. Fiqh, if anyone ever tries to give you the picture that fiqh is the guesswork of human beings, then this person understands nothing about how Sharia works. Fiqh is not the guesswork of human beings. No, fiqh is guided understanding by the understandings of human beings, but those principles are taken directly from the Quran and Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ taught the companions to exert themselves with fiqh. He did. The Prophet ﷺ taught them this. Now, when the Prophet ﷺ sent Hudhayfa, Sayyidina Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, he sent him to al-Yaman. He asked him, how will you judge? And he said, I'll judge according to the book of Allah. He said, what if you don't find it in the book of Allah? He said, I'll judge according to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, what if I don't find it in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? What if you don't find it in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? He said to the Prophet, أَجْتَهِدُ رَأْيِي وَلَا آلُ. I will exert myself in them and I will not leave any effort except I try it. I will exert myself to the fullest, in other words. أَجْتَهِدُ رَأْيِي وَلَا آلُ. The Prophet ﷺ put his hand on his chest like that and he said, لِيَهْنَكَ الْعِلْمُ أَبَا الْمُنذِرِ. Prophet ﷺ supported him. He supported him in this understanding of his in terms of fiqh. Oh no, sorry. He said, Alhamdulillah alladhi hada Rasulu Rasulillahi sallallahu ila ma yuhibbuhu Allahu wa Rasuluh. That's what he said to Sayyidina Hudhayfa. He said, Alhamdulillah, the one who guided the messenger of Allah to what Allah and His messenger love. So fiqh is actually part of our deen. We need fiqh. It is an essential part of it for the reasons I just mentioned. Now, is fiqh set in stone? No, it's not. Most of it's not. The vast majority of it's not. Very little parts of fiqh are actually areas of ijma', consensus, categorical agreement. And that's something that Allah made as a feature in Islam. Allah made Islam like this, by the way. Most things are variables. Few things are areas of utter agreement. And there's a lot of wisdom behind that. That needs a full discussion. We don't have enough time to unpack that. But just to give you a simple explanation of it, if everything was set in stone, life would become extremely difficult for us as Muslims. If everything was set in stone based on the realities of 7th century Arabia, our lives would be very, very difficult. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us ease through the differences of opinion that you find in fiqh. Right? And that's why the differences that you find between scholars of the ummah in matters of fiqh is actually a form of mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why there's this hadith, اختلاف أمتي رحمة. This is a hadith that has been generally accepted in terms of its meaning by the ummah throughout the generations. اختلاف أمتي رحمة. And this is اختلاف الأمة في الفروع, in secondary matters and matters of fiqh. Right? So, inshallah, through our explanation of Fiqh of Salah, you'll come to appreciate the difference of opinion that you find in the books by the scholars. Each one of them following different evidence. We need to have a great deal of respect, patience, because sometimes people antagonize what they can understand. It doesn't make sense. Why does everyone have why can't everyone just agree upon everything? A lot of people say this a lot of times when it comes to Islam. But sometimes the disagreement is part of the perfection. The disagreement is part of the perfection. You know, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the fixed things, those things that are set, very clear, and we've united upon them. Like the prohibition of alcohol, like the prohibition of interest, like the prohibition of fornication, like the prohibition of those universals that are mentioned in the Quran. And He's made many other things, matters of disagreement. It's a great deal of mercy. But who's the founder of fiqh? Allah and His Messenger. But what happened with time as Islam spread and the Islamic State was established and many people entered into the religion? More and more issues began arising that needed to be answered. And with time, fiqh developed into a science. It actually developed into a science with books, with different schools, with different approaches. And that happened with other sciences as well. So, founder, Allah and His Messenger. The first to codify, what does codify mean? Put rules for it, put it in books, document it. These are the mujtahid imams. These are like these are not only the imams of the four schools, there were others along with them. Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, and many others who did not have schools or approaches that had as big as a following, and with time they became less and less. Now, that's the founder. The title, Ilm al-Fiqh or Ilm al-Halal wal-Haram, its sources. Well, there's 4 agreed upon sources. Again, you study this in Usul al-Fiqh. I'm not really going to go in detail about it. Quran, Sunnah, something called Ijma', something else called Qiyas. And then there are other sources of Islamic law that are secondary sources. And there's a difference of opinion about a number of these sources, right? What's the legal ruling of studying fiqh? This is important. This is really, really important for what's the ruling of me learning this science here? Well, it depends what you're talking about. We have 2 types of knowledge, or 2 types of knowledge when it comes to fiqh. We have fard ayn, and we have fard kifaya. What's a fard ayn? It is an individual obligation, meaning that it's something that every Muslim needs to know. Meaning it's something that if I don't know, I may be committing a sin because of my negligence. What falls under fard ayn? Who can tell me? How many of you have heard this term before? Just raise your hand. Raise your hand if you've heard the term. All right, what falls under it? If you've studied this before, what falls under fard ayn? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Huh? Salah? Okay, salah falls under fard ayn for just about every mukallaf, right? Okay, what else would you include in that? Someone else said something. I heard another thing. Zakah. Raise your hand, raise your hand. Zakah. Is zakah a fard ayn for everybody? What do you think? Is it a fard ayn for everybody? Who's it a fard ayn for? Huh? It's a fard ayn for someone who has to pay zakah. Someone who meets the requirement of zakah. And then what are the requirements for zakah? Well, one of them is nisab, but there are other ones too, right? Hawalan al-hawl, right? And other things along with that. So look, not everyone needs to study zakah, but when you become someone who has money, that's when it becomes fard ayn on you. You got to study zakah right now. So the first fard ayn that's going to fall on you is going to be salah. What else is among the first fard ayn that's going to fall on you with salah? Huh? Siyam, yes, it's going to fall on you. What else along with that? So fasting, praying. What else is among the first fard ayn that basically is across the board for every Muslim? Huh? Saying the shahada? No, shahada is going to be relating to faith. Hajj? No. Hajj is not the first. Someone might live and die and never reach the requirement of Hajj. If they're poor, just like a good percentage of the world, and they can't afford the journey, or they're ill, they won't get the obligation of Hajj. Raise your hand, guys. Don't shout out names. Let's get used to it. Go ahead. Reading Quran with tajweed. Well, there's a detail relating to that. So he said reading Quran with tajweed. It depends on what tajweed you're talking about. If you're talking about not distorting the letters and not distorting the vowels, yeah, that's fard ayn for someone who's actually reading Quran, right? But learning that's what we call lahn jali, right? Lahn jali, what is lahn jali? Like if someone is reading, especially with their Fatiha, because it relates to your salah. Like if someone is reading Fatiha and he does not know Dhamma from Fatha to Kasra, and he's saying صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم أعوذ بالله, he just changed the meaning big time. Instead of أنعمت, he said أنعمت. I didn't know. So that type of tajweed is obligatory for anyone who reads the Mus'haf, especially someone who's going to pray Surah Al-Fatiha. Right? But the other forms of tajweed are fard kifaya, like learning about idgham, ikhfa, mad, مش عارف. That's fard kifaya. We're going to get to what that is. So there's something that you guys missed. There's one, so you said salah, siyam, fasting, prayer. Tawheed is not a fard ayn. For tawheed, you're not a Muslim if you're not. So tawheed, learning about Allah Azza wa Jal, we're talking about fiqh. We're talking about fiqh here. Don't take us to aqidah. So of course, every Muslim needs to have aqidah down. They need to understand aqidah. But let's keep it with fiqh, right? Any sister, go ahead. You want to say something? Huh? Well, what if someone doesn't have parents? I'm talking about something that applies across the board. Something that applies across the board. Go ahead. Tahara, purification, right? Wudu is among those things. You know, the Prophet ﷺ passed by a grave, and one of two graves. And one of these two graves, the person was being punished because he did not properly cleanse himself after going to the bathroom. كان لا يستبرئ أو لا يستنزه من بوله. Right? So that's the reason why he was being punished in the grave. So of course it's from the fard ayn to learn about tahara. It's a fard ayn. Then as you get older, we're going to add more and more furud a'yan. You have money, you got to pay zakah. You start engaging in business, buying and selling, you're going to have to learn about ahkam al-tijara, the business transactions and financial transactions, what's the ruling of them. And so on and so forth. When you get married, you're going to have to learn about the rulings relating to marriage. If you get divorced, you're going to have to learn about the rulings relating to divorce. If you get an inheritance, or you're in a position where you're a part of this discussion about dividing an estate, you need to learn ahkam al-mirath. So you see, that's what fard ayn means. It's what every Muslim needs to learn. Everything we're going to study in this class is relating to fard ayn, because it's about salah. And it's fard ayn for every one of us, right? What's fard kifaya, Raise your hand. All right, go ahead. Zakaria. So it's Fard Kifaya, a community obligation, refers to a type of thing that if it's fulfilled, the sin of not doing it falls from everyone else, meaning they're not going to get the sin. That's what Fard Kifaya is. An example of Fard Kifaya is, raise your hand, raise your hand, raise your hand. Okay, Janaza, okay, performing Janaza. Performing Janaza is one of the examples of Fard Kifaya. What else? What else is an example of Fard Kifaya? Go ahead. Salat al-Eid. According to the Jumhur, it's Sunnah Mu'akkada. It's an emphasized Sunnah. According to the Hanafi school, it's wajib. It's not Fard Kifaya. Yeah, it's wajib. It's not Fard, it's wajib. Yeah. Yes. According to some, they say Salat al-Jama'ah is Fard Kifaya. Others say it's Sunnah Mu'akkada. Sunnah Mu'akkada is an emphasized Sunnah. It is basically something the Prophet ﷺ consistently did, and he did not abandon except for a special circumstance. Right? So some say it's Sunnah Mu'akkada, some say it's Fard Kifaya, like you said. Right? So those are some examples of Fard Ayn and Fard Kifaya. That's the legal ruling of studying fiqh. What are you going to study? We have fiqh of worship. We have fiqh of transactions. We have domestic law, marriage, inheritance, divorce. We have criminal law, injurious crimes, types of wrongful killing, qisas, blood indemnities, hudud, jihad, hunting and slaughtering, oaths and vows, the judicial system, and itq, manumission. These are the different chapters that you study in fiqh. These are the different chapters you study in fiqh. In this course, what are we going to be going over? This book, many of you maybe didn't get it. This book over here, this. If you didn't get it, I think we still have copies over here. Like we said in the beginning, it's for $20. If you want to get it, you could just take a copy and donate that amount to the masjid, inshallah. It's called The Accessible Conspectus. It is a commentary on this book, which you could also get. It's called The Ultimate Conspectus. What is this? This is what we call a manual, a matn. In Arabic, what is this matn called? It's called Matn Abi Shuja'. Matn Abi Shuja', that's what it's called. Or Matn al-Ghaya wa Taqrib, that's another name for it. Matn al-Ghaya wa Taqrib. This is very abridged. It just lists out things for you, the different sections. This I will share in our WhatsApp group because there's a PDF of it, inshallah. I'm going to share this. This commentary here is a lot more detailed. It's an explanation of this book. It's what we call a sharh in Arabic. We call this a sharh. It's a commentary. Why do we have a manual and why do we have a commentary? What happened is there's a whole lot of history here, by the way, a whole lot of history. Inshallah, what we're planning to do is in the end of November, we're going to have an intensive in the masjid. And it's going to be Introduction to Islamic Law, Fiqh 101. We're going to go through the ins and outs of what happened historically for these types of things to develop. Who is Imam al-Shafi'i? Who's Imam Abu Hanifa? Who's Imam Malik? Where do these ideas and these opinions come from? How can I learn a little bit about Islamic history and how it grew through time? Right? That's part of what we're going to discuss in that course. We're going to also discuss other stuff. But basically, what happened with the passage of time is the scholars were trying to make knowledge very accessible to people. So they summarized it in very brief lists of the do's and don'ts. That's what this is. It's a listing of the do's and don'ts for each section. The requisites, the conditions, the pillars, the invalidators, and they do that for every single subsection. Right? The recommended prayers, list them out. Which ones are recommended to be done in congregation? Which ones are recommended to be done alone? What are the rulings for the traveler prayer? What's the distance for travel? And so on and so forth. They list it out. Then you have a book like this that explains that. Inshallah, what I'm going to do is go through this, not word for word, but I will explain to you section by section everything that's said in here relating to Fiqh of Salah. We're only going over Fiqh of Salah here. We're not going to go over this whole book. It's too big to go over in 3 months. It's too big to go over. The fiqh is very vast. As you can ask some of the shabab who've been going over the rest of the book with me from over a year ago. So it's very vast to go through this whole book. But we're going to go over Fiqh of Salah alone, and we're going to focus, and it's going to be really engaging, inshallah. You guys can ask any questions you have about each and every section. Just ask you to be patient, try to read from this book ahead of time. There's a few documents. How many of you guys are not on the WhatsApp group yet? How many of you are not on the WhatsApp group? Raise your hand. A bunch of you. Try to get on the WhatsApp group before you leave today. Try to get on the WhatsApp group before you leave today, because on the WhatsApp group, whenever I update the documents, you'll get access to them, inshallah. There's already 4 documents that are there in the course drive. There's a Fiqh of Salah packet. There's a bunch of charts that we're going to end up explaining, inshallah. And there are some other, there's this syllabus here. So it's actually quite a long syllabus. Inshallah, you could read this on your own. If you ever have any questions, you can come and ask me, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Today was just meant to be like an introduction, a dose of what we're going to go over. The other thing is, this session's being recorded. It's being live streamed, but as unlisted on YouTube. It's unlisted, meaning that if you were to go to our YouTube page, you won't see it. That's because we want to try to encourage people to come to this course in person. You could listen to a lecture on YouTube all you want, but when you have access to a course where you can actually ask your questions and get them answered, it's going to help you learn a whole lot more than just listening to it passively as you're driving or as you're sitting at home. Knowledge needs that type of engagement, right? So inshallah, what we're going to do next time is we're going to begin reading this book directly. I'm not going to go through the rest of the pages on this syllabus. Do that on your own. And if you want to ask questions, you know where to find me, right? So inshallah, we'll go start with the book next time. But before we conclude, does anyone have any direct questions they'd like to ask before we close for today? Actually, there's one question before I take your direct questions. Next time, next Tuesday, Isha is going to be at 8:10. Next Isha is going to be next week. Isha is going to be at 8:10. So today was a shorter class because there's a very tight time, and I know pushing the class to 7 might make it difficult for some because of their work and everything like that, getting home from work. Should we start after Isha from next time, or the time after that? So if we start from Isha next time, we'll end up starting the class by 8:30, and we'll finish by like 9:30, 9:45. Or should we start from the time after that? Show of hands. How many of you want to start from Isha next time? Raise your hand. Next time. All right. How many of you want to start from Isha the time after that? The time after that, Isha is going to be at 8 o'clock. Right? All right. So the vast majority want to start from next time after Isha, inshallah. We'll keep it short. We'll keep it an hour. Inshallah, once Isha gets down to 7:30, it'll be a lot easier because we'll end up starting our class by 7:45. And we'll be done by 9 o'clock, inshallah, sharp, bidnillah. All right? Any direct questions before we stand for salah? Go ahead. How do we join the WhatsApp group? Is Hamza or Ahmed somewhere around? Okay. It's going to be on the screen after salah? Okay, it's going to be on the screen after salah. Or you can ask one of the volunteers to help you. All right? All right. Anyone else have a direct question? Go ahead. Yes, so this book is based on the Shafi'i madhab. It's the Shafi'i school. This is the Shafi'i madhab. However, based on your request or on certain important issues, I'll be mentioning other opinions. It won't be just limited to the Shafi'i school. Very often I will cite other schools on very hot topic issues, very well-known issues. I'll mention the other opinions just so you're aware. If this madhab is hard, you could be aware of what else is out there. Or if you ask me, can you tell me what the Hanafi school is? If I know the answer, I will tell you. Right? What else? Any other questions before we stand for salah? Any other questions? We're good? Barakallah. Oh, go ahead. Huh? Next time, you could just read the very first section. And that'll be the very first section in fiqh. Read the introduction plus the very first section of the chapter on salah. So read the introduction plus the very first section on salah. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب